Hello and welcome to the FinTech Finance Virtual Arena. And today we're going to be talking about how banks are partnering to facilitate incredible innovations in financial services. So joining me today, I have two specialists in the area. I've got Banking Circle's John Levine and Chris Renfer from Zurcher Kantonalbank. Guys, thank you so much for joining. To kick things off, could I actually get you to introduce yourselves? So John, if I could come to you first, could you introduce yourself, maybe tell our audience a bit more about your role at Banking Circle, please?
Sure, Doug, and thanks for having us. So as you said, I'm John Levine. I run as co-head the institutional banking segment here at Banking Circle. That's the part of Banking Circle that works with other banks in the market, both as partners of ourselves and as our clients to power their own activities.
Incredible. Thank you very much, John. And also, Chris, thank you very much for joining as well. Could you tell our audience a bit more about Zurcher Kantonalbank as well and your role?
Of course, I'm thrilled to be here. Hello, everybody. My name is Chris Renfer. So I've been working for almost 20 years now for Zurcher Kantonalbank. And for those who doesn't know the bank, we are based in Zurich and we are a full service bank, which means we are having a universal banking business model approach like retail banking, private banking, corporate banking, and so on. And my role there is head of trend and innovation management, which basically covers three core services. Namely, we observe the market. This goes in the direction of trends and fintech and startup screening, partnering up with universities, incubators, and accelerators. The second is we open up new perspectives. That means we evaluate and initiate selected innovations through our innovation process. And the third one is opening up, bringing ideas to success, which means we promote entrepreneurship and innovation skills by the means of our own innovation program.
Absolutely brilliant. Well, thank you so much. I'm really excited to hear your insight on some of these topics. So, John, if I could come to you first then, I think to kind of get a better understanding, what are some of the specific challenges banks might be facing when it comes to future-proofing themselves and what part does partnership play a role in that?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, Doug. And I think there's a whole bunch of stuff that goes into future-proofing. At a very basic level, it's actually just keeping the existing infrastructure a bank has running. Most banks have a lot of systems that do all sorts of great things to run their core business. Most of these are not yet cloud-based, so servers need to be maintained, security patches, cyber defense, all of these kind of necessary to operate requirements. And then when you think about future-proofing, it's also about keeping your business model aligning with the market. How do you build new capabilities? How do you roll out new services? How do you enable that on your existing IT stack? What has to be changed? So it's quite a challenge for banks actually to do this all in parallel across many systems. We live in the real world, right? With limited resources. No bank's IT budget is infinite, and you have to stretch. And that's kind of where partnerships comes into it too. Is sometimes the solution might be you have to have a certain system managed in-house. It's core to your mission. It's fundamentally important to your business. But sometimes there's a system or a capability you need that exists in the market that you see as kind of a commoditized offering or something that you just don't really want to maintain yourself. That's where the partnership angle comes in. And maybe you can find somebody in the market that does something you need with less capital expenditure and possibly less operational expenditure as well through economies of scale that the partner might bring.
Interesting. And with that in mind then, I guess really it sounds like kind of trying to maintain that course while keeping all those systems alive. That must be such a massive undertaking. Now, as a result, a lot of banks still have that legacy infrastructure. It's still quite prevalent, especially in business banking. So, Chris, can I come to you and ask, really, how can partnering foster innovation despite having those old systems in place that are really hard to shift?
And when I think of partnerships, I think mainly if I had to sum it up to 2 points, I think of speed, and the other point is culture. So in terms of thinking of of the legacy. And I mean, and here I don't only mean IT legacy, but as well as processes, or you know, like work desks and topics such as this dimension.
Yeah.
I see that speed is crucial, and we gain a lot of insights, new perspective whilst we operate with partnerships, so with fintechs and startups and on. And we realize that those perspectives, they are like, you know, the main assets. That's what most of the fintech and startups do. They concentrate on one specific use case or one specific pain point which they are trying to solve. And this is sometimes hard for an incumbent or a corporate, because we are like really fixed on our core businesses. And that's where I come in with our process. We want to do the adjacent innovation, you know, like building up on the core business, and if so, and if possible, we want to do the transformational innovation. And that's one thing, gain the perspective to gain speed and do that. And the other thing is culture. What I mean with culture is, you know, the concept of it's called ambidextrous culture, ambidextrous organization. So you have like both hands, you have to balance or keep in balance. You have the classical management approach, like words in efficient, cost reduction, and so comes the term. And the other side is like the entrepreneurial mindset. And we should keep this in balance. And this is where I see the point that partnering up with partnerships, they spur actually with this mindset, with those kinds of skills, can they spur our innovation as well.
It's absolutely excellent. And you know, John, if I could kind of fire that same question back to you, you know, do you think partnering is almost that key to, as Chris said, to spur on innovation despite maybe some of those older systems?
Yeah, I think that's right. That you know, first of all, a partner may bring speed. I think, Chris, you hit on a really important point there. And then secondly, the partner may be able to solve around the world and the facts as they lie. So if you've got systems that have certain limitations, you know, you have choices. You can change those systems and build it ground up, or you can partner. And actually, some banks even use a series of partners. They might use a middleware layer that does IT plumbing between different modules that they want to add on from different partners. And I think Chris is right too, that a lot of the innovation is adjacent, right? That, you know, in the early days of kind of fintech labs, I think banks bet on kind of any and all. But actually there's a lot more discipline in the market now, that it's really thinking about use cases for the technology you're insourcing for partners, and that they're adjacent to what you do and are going to make what you do in your core business, you know, that much more awesome.
Yeah, well, I mean, speaking of that kind of core business, I always think, yeah, the heart of a bank is ultimately payments. And with that in mind, John, if I could stick with you for one extra question, the pandemic and also the payments industry itself has kind of gone through a revolution. So, I mean, do you think that's changing the way that the bank can operate? And with that in mind, how critical will cross-border payments be to the core business of a bank if suddenly the whole concept of a bank is changing because of partnerships?
So the whole payments industry and landscape is fascinating to me. So certainly I agree. The simple answer to your question is yes. Payments are super important. We did some surveys actually last year, and I think we found that 70% of banks saw international payments as either critically important or important to their business. And you know, with varying responses, the UK was a bit higher for obvious reasons that, you know, we're not part of a large currency bloc. A little bit lower in the Euro countries, but still I think it was even 50% in the Eurozone countries. So I think everyone accepts this is important. What I think is underappreciated is just how innovative the regulation is in Europe. You know, Europe leads the world in payments innovation. And I don't think we give ourselves enough credit for that, actually, when we think about our regulatory framework. But actually, we are enabling tremendous change. And we're really the leaders globally, with a couple other countries at most, when it comes to instant payments, low value payments, dealing with things like credit deductions and Benny deductions, which were some of the old frictions you still see in many parts of the world. And you know, it gives us a chance to make a big difference in our customers' lives. In retail, it's something that people are acutely aware of costs. And increasingly, even in the corporate space, right? Corporate top line has not been amazing the last couple of years, right? It's been a tough trading environment. So cost focus matters. And if you can help businesses save a couple of euros in every payment, it starts to add up.
Yeah, it's really just galvanized the way that I feel a lot of fintechs that might be partnering are looking at the whole model itself. Now, John, you bring up an interesting point there of the regulatory change that we've seen in Europe. So, Chris, if I could come to you with this, we're seeing that the regulations, especially as I said, John mentioned just then, in Europe especially, have really taken on stride world-leading, world-class regulations when it comes to fostering innovation and partnerships. So do you think that you can also have partnerships that enhance the kind of regtech side of things, the compliance standards that a lot of these large banks are trying to kind of get to grips with, I think is the word I'm thinking of?
Yeah, totally. I mean, although I'm focusing on products and services, fostering or spur the innovation on the retail banking side, I come across a lot of the so-called RegTech solutions and so-called RegTech startups, enterprises. And of course, I mean, even Switzerland is highly regulated. And I mean, this is one of the greatest assets actually from Swiss banking, like trust and security. So this is an urgent matter, compliance and all the other topics within like risk management and so on. And what I see actually, or I know that we of course look on the side of RegTech and on the side of partner to spur all those processes, namely. What is, for example, anti-money laundering or onboarding, KYC, identity management, which we actually also are in kind of an ecosystem around the Swiss identity topic there. So I see that very well. And what I actually like the most in terms of foster innovation is, so I began 2018, right, with this role. And if I had to say it like that, the bridge was wider between the entrepreneur side, startups and so on, and the corporates, because mostly we didn't know each other, which kind of use cases or pain points we are addressing. And now, like 3 years later, I'm really glad that this bridge is so narrow right now that we completely understand both sides of the dialogue, also both sides. So startups anticipate very much also the compliance side of our bank or Swiss banks in generally. And I like this very much because you reduce the time and you can value actually the time to fostering the partnership and get on and get some cool and great use cases on it. And that's if I think like that, I think that's really a great achievement.
Yeah, it's kind of the achievement I feel like a lot of banks are now having to actually strive to, when before maybe they were just looking at their core business. Now, John, if I could also fire back to you as well in terms of looking at partnerships to solve compliance issues. How have you seen that? I mean, Chris mentioned AMLD5, for instance, that's happened in Germany. From your perspective, how have you seen partnerships impact the way that banks can remain compliant?
So it's a complex question, actually, right? Because compliance, at the end of the day, you're allowed to use partners, but you're ultimately accountable as a bank. And so there's a lot of thoughtfulness that goes into it. So one obvious example of partnership is, banks often use providers to help them manage sanction screening, to get the relevant lists collated, to run the fuzzy logic engines and all of the things that are part and parcel of that. And that's quite a widely accepted model. And in fact, in my old employer, I know there was a combination of vendors plus internal technology, and that was inside the walls of a big FTSE listed bank. The other thing, which actually is somewhat related to compliance and regulatory matters, is banks are generally retrenching more toward their home markets. So if you think where the world was 15 years ago, big banks wanted to be bigger, they wanted to enter more markets, they wanted to set up local operations. And then following the financial crisis, there's been a slow kind of return back home. So banks have sold off overseas operations, they've closed overseas branches. And actually, part of that is around the operational costs of having a treasury center in each country, having staff, maybe not having enough scale. But part of that also is actually managing, for us, one of the things we see a lot is banks are having to maintain clearing connections around the world. So if you had an office in London to clear your pounds and an office in Germany to clear your German operations, you still have clients that maybe want to do the odd payment in pounds or in euros. But actually, that's somewhat what we do, right? Is we actually step into the shoes of banks going back home to pick up the functionality that they need in a particular geography while they're saving the cost base of the people and saving the regulatory requirements in that local jurisdiction. So that's a particular partnership benefit that we actually are seeing play out in the real world today.
That's really interesting. Even within Europe, because of SEPA, you always think that a payment, just even if it's cross-border, is generally going to be quite easy. But you bring up all those kind of regulatory issues that still have an issue for the bank's customers. Now, it's kind of touched on a point I want to explore further. And Chris, if I could come to you with this one first, then it is still very much a global industry, and we see different nations really adopting partnerships in different ways. So I'd be really interested to hear your perspective from the Swiss side of things about how partnerships are really being woven into the financial services industry.
Yeah, of course. There are a lot of cases, of course, but let me give you like three main examples, which I always observe, and I also, put through my innovation process, and comes from my network, from my innovation network. So the one is that partnership is being established with the so-called incubators and accelerators, but also as well academia, universities and so on. And the main goal when I talk to those guys, to my friends, colleagues, is that they want this, this whole spirit, this mindset, but also to know about those innovative topics, like blockchain and AI and so on. So it's covering the whole outside-in view. The second example is when incumbents partnering up together. So that is something we saw like maybe 12 years ago. I'm not exactly so correct, 10, 12 years, between bank incumbents and insurance incumbents. So we have, especially last year, saw a lot of cooperation and collaboration on this side. With big brands, and basically they're looking for partnering together for bringing their core businesses together, and their most perfect disciplines together in order to address the customer from one view. For example, a very popular topic is living, like the topic around living. This is what I see, and this is not only one, but it's like 5 examples out of it. And the third one, which I want to mention, is as well when incumbents partnering up with startups. So, and then the main thing is actually to gain the relevance for the customers, they have the same customers, right? And to gain the relevance in the everyday, daily touch point, for example, out of banking relevance, but also in order to give those customers like a 360-degree experience out of it. And you can only do that if you partnering up with the best competences you get, like the best from the startup and the best for the incumbents and so on. So those are the 3 main examples I could give from Switzerland.
Yeah. And it's really interesting to hear, especially to your second point, the kind of incumbents partnering with other incumbents to offer up different products from insurance. And John, could I also ask, from your perspective, from Banking Circle, I know you've got numerous different operations across Europe. What are you seeing when it comes to a particular region that's kind of maybe nailing partnerships in financial services?
I think it's broad-based. This is the great thing, is that the innovation is all over the place. You see it in France, you see it in the UK, you see it in the Nordics. You see it in many other places that I probably am less conversant in. Certainly Germany's doing a lot. And I think even in, Iberia, Italy, it's across the board, right? And I think that's because there's opportunity there. And I think everyone knows they have to seize the opportunity. And also it's further afield too, right? There's a lot of innovation in Asia Pacific, certainly, that's been very prominent. I think the US, there's lots of innovation going on, Canada. I mean, actually what's most impressive is the scale of innovation all over the world, in the places where we have relationships. It's quite cool to see what's going on. And I think ultimately it is great for customers. There's a lot more competition, better price execution, better service, a more digital and easier experience. And corporate banking, it's happening too.
Interesting. Now, with that in mind, with those new priorities that you've mentioned there, do you think some are going to take more precedent for banks in the next 6 months? We've seen the pandemic maybe change what a bank is going to be focused on in the short term. Do you think any of those priorities that you've just mentioned are going to suddenly rise to the top?
So I think what's going on a little bit is that actually we're getting back to what banks were really trying to execute on before the pandemic. So I think about a year ago, we're in the middle of the COVID lockdowns, huge liquidity squeeze, everyone forced to working from home. VPN gateways had to be scaled 10 times, branches were closed, contactless limits had to be scaled up. We had to get C-bills and bounce back and paycheck protection loan programs rolled out and many other things. So I think there was a bit of a change in what was the most immediate priority from March of 2020 until, it was delivered maybe for different products at different points over the following 6 months. And then I think there was a little bit of, let's just get through 2020 because it was pretty brutal. I feel like in 2021, everyone had a breath of fresh air around the end of the year. We're now back in innovation mode. The kind of stuff we thought was important to our clients in February 2020 remains important to our clients in March 2021, and we're back on the front foot implementing it. I mean, Chris, are you sort of, does that ring true a little bit to you?
Totally. I was smiling, not because it's funny, because I had like vivid memories, from the last year, and it's exactly that, John. So we had to shift some of the priorities, of course, VPN, working from home. Can I, easily dock into our systems? That was quite a challenge actually in the beginning, but also the interaction with our clients, establishing a secure and a good line for video advisory or video conferencing. That was an example. And of course, all the enhancement for the credit processes in order to help and support our SMEs in Switzerland. Switzerland is like a SMEs country, right? So that was mainly the priority. But luckily, I wouldn't go that far for Zurcher Kantonalbank that we said like, okay, let's not do innovation. That wasn't at all the feeling actually. But now we have the whole pressure of that speed upcoming is now has been laid down, and now we can focus on the other innovations which we actually had in mind for 2020. And of course the pandemic gave us new experience, new insight to judge which kind of topics around those projects we should prioritize. And one of the most common is the one we already mentioned, payment, of course. I still see payment as the door to our clients, because if you want or not, we have to pay every day, most likely, and that is what I really like, or the good thing about the pandemic for the importance of payment, that we have a focus on the importance of payment for our clients.
Yeah, it does really realign almost your perspective of what the bank has to provide, and suddenly you realize that it's not a peripheral kind of digital technology company like some of the banks might be wanting to become. It's people's bread and butter, and I think that was really interesting to hear that. So, I mean, Chris, we've kind of in that last question been talking about how partnering as kind of fostered innovation to kind of solve issues, but I'm really interested to hear, where can partnering take innovation into the future for financial services?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's strongly what I do, and I believe is that you can speed up and spur innovation with partnering up, and you immediately actually gain new insights, new fresh ideas, because it's every time it's some other man or woman who has an other mindset, another view of banking, of processes, of client centricity, and so on. And it's like there, you gain this instant if you partner up, if you have a conversation, if you act within an innovation ecosystem, and so on. So that's one thing. And I think if you do that as an incumbent or corporate, you are much more able to connecting all the dots within the classical management structure. And also, I think you profit in the future business from this wider network you gain. And probably think that would become very handy in the future, yeah.
Absolutely brilliant. And John, could I also get your perspective on this? Where can partnering take banks into the future?
Yeah, I mean, it's the future is limitless, to sort of be, to say something cliche. There's so many good partnership opportunities out there with so many interesting players in the world doing great things. And I think banks are getting past some of the biggest pain points, right? The online banking experience and the app-based banking experience is getting much better. Some of the remedial stuff to catch up with the leaders, I think, has been done in a lot of banks, and now they do need to get in the front foot. What's next? I think my advice on this is, think about what your customers really are dreaming of, or even create those dreams. To think about a Steve Jobs model. He created the iPhone before we knew we wanted iPhones. And then the bank's got to pick, what are the partners that can enable that for them? And probably the hardest part for someone like Chris is you're probably getting thousands of inbound inquiries every day. How do you take 10,000 good ideas and pick 3 or 5 or whatever the right number is?
That's heavy, yeah. It's true. I mean, I only can say a structure is always a good solution, and experience, and yeah. And I think if you go on to that topic with a great passion. I mean, it is a passion to do my job at Zurcher Kantonalbank. It's more, how to say, it's more easy, to go with all those external impulses. Yeah.
Yeah, I can completely imagine, because if you can't sell the idea to your customers, you can't create that dream, as John, you said. And I think from the sounds of it as well, Chris, from your side, it sounds like banking has maybe caught up to that tech side, where we're going to create services for the customer rather than just maybe sit back and just let the industry move on in front. So guys, I think that's all we have time for. So thank you so much for both your input. It's been absolutely fascinating. And also to our viewers as well, you can catch the rest of the series and much more over at www.fintechf.com, and of course YouTube and LinkedIn, where I'll see you then. So thank you very much, and goodbye.